webinar series here. We are in virtual format, and we've been hosting several events via virtual forum as of late. So today we are excited to share with you what local companies are doing and working on in this space, specifically targeting COVID-19 innovations. First, ultimately, we're just wishing you all are doing well, you and your families are staying well, work, life, health challenges are minimized as much as possible. We know these are difficult times, and so we really appreciate you joining us and spending your time here, hopefully over your lunch hour, and look forward to sharing with you and hearing from some of our biotech leaders in the BioHub community. I want to introduce Steph Ottinger, who's our Director of Programs and Communications here at CvilleBioHub. She has a few logistics to share with you about how we'll be operating today, and then we'll get going.
Great. Hi, everyone. Would love for this to be an interactive discussion today, even though we have some short company presentations. So just a reminder that the chat function at the bottom of your screen is a great tool to let us know if you're interested in asking a question during the Q&A. You can also use your raise your hand function, and we'll be able to see that and call on you. So whichever way you prefer, please do share your thoughts or questions for our panelists today. We're excited for the conversation.
Great, thanks, Steph. So to kick this conversation off, I had to think back about what feels like almost a year ago, which was a conversation I had on March the 3rd with Bob Creedon, who's the UVA LVG Seed Fund Director. And we have co-hosted a few events with LVG, and we were talking about the idea that we should bring in some experts to talk about COVID-related science, what's happening in this space, and honestly, it felt very distant from us. This was just March 3rd, less than 2 months ago. You know, what has transpired was not at all in our purview, and we were looking for experts and people working in this space to bring forward. And you know, now we fast forward, over 3 million people have been infected with this virus globally, and biotech R&D has been moving at a breakneck pace to bring new innovations for really 3 major areas in the need for combating this virus. There's been the immediate needs that we're seeing at the front lines of serving patients and treating them in the immediate term. So we're seeing the PPE response, ventilator innovation happening, where we know that there have been shortages in back stocks and stockpiles. We've also been seeing a lot of innovation happening in the intermediate needs, which really will be serving patients and treating them therapeutically. Over 60 drugs today are now in the pipeline, which you know has really come very quickly into a pipeline to support the immediate treatment of patients that have been affected. And then we've really got the long-term innovation happening in working towards a vaccine, which we know is going to be critical to eliminating this virus, and there are many groups working on that. In fact, we hope to highlight in future conversations some groups at UVA that are working in this space. But today we're really excited to share with you from 4 companies that are here locally talking. We're going to hear from Indoor Biotech, Caretaker Medical, Archimedics, and Locus Health. And here's how this is going to work. We'll have each company highlighted and share a quick short presentation, and then after each presentation has happened, we'll get into some Q&A. We'll maybe hear about some other innovations that are happening across the region. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce Martin Chapman, who is also co-founder of CvilleBioHub, and he's the president and CEO of Indoor Biotechnologies. And Martin is a community leader, an entrepreneur. He began a company in 1998, where he was previously a tenured professor in medicine microbiology at UVA. And he really saw the opportunity to commercialize his science and enable to impact a broader audience. So Indoor's core technology is a portfolio of antibodies. And so they have been able to work in the allergen space, but we're here to hear from Martin and his team about how they have translated their capabilities into supporting the biomanufacturing of COVID-19 proteins. So I'll turn it over to you, Martin, and go ahead and anybody from your team can share slides as ready.
Hey, Nikki, thanks very much. Good day, everybody. I just want to say that Indo Biotechnologies Lab has remained fully operational during this pandemic. We've pivoted from manufacture, which we still do, but we saw an opportunity a few weeks ago to start to apply our expertise to the expression of the SARS-CoV-2 virus proteins, which are the cause of the viral infection. It's the way the virus gets into the body. It's the way it elicits symptoms of COVID-19. So the challenge really is to produce large quantities of these proteins and to produce several proteins that we know are important in this disease. So what you may have heard just recently about the problems with diagnostic testing, for example. A lot of those problems may be related to the quality of the proteins that are produced, and also to other problems with that kind of testing. So we started to produce a suite of these proteins. The idea is they'll be used for diagnostic use, but they'll also really be useful for vaccines, for the development of vaccines, their vaccine targets, and also for monitoring changes in the immune response that occur during vaccine therapy. But I'm not going to be the person to tell you about this, because we have two excellent protein scientists in our company, Dr. Saya Agar and Crystal Richardson, and they're going to take you on a 5-minute tour of the coronavirus world and the proteins that are important and that make up the body of this tricky virus. So Saya, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about the virus proteins.
Hi, everyone. I'm Saya. I am a senior scientist here at Indo Biotechnologies. And before coming to InBio, I was a postdoc at UVA Department of Pharmacology. I worked with Kevin Lynch. Before that, a short postdoc at UCLA, and I received my graduate degree at University of Missouri in Columbia. So my background is in biochemistry and biophysics, and since arriving at InBio, I have been involved in producing a number of allergen and non-allergen proteins, including rhinovirus capsid proteins. So today I'm here to walk you through a number of proteins that we're interested in expressing and purifying here at InBio with my colleagues. And we're just going to take a look at a few of these proteins. So let's see what this virus looks like. Everybody sees my slides? Slides good?
Yeah, they look good, Saya.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm sure a lot of you have already seen pictures or schematic pictures of the virus. It's interesting that basically the cross section of the virus that we see in this view. First thing that jumps out are these protrusions that actually stick out of the virus. These are called spikes. Here it's shown in orange. Each spike is composed of 3 copies of this very large protein called the S protein. The structure of this spike protein was detected early on, solved early on by cryo-electron microscopy, and we exactly know what this spike protein looks like. So the interest in the spike protein is because the spike is the point of contact between the virus and the human lung epithelial cells. So when the virus attaches through the spikes to ACE2 receptors that are located on our lung epithelial cells, after this attachment, the virus gains entry into the cells and the infectious cycle starts. So it's very important to have this protein on hand, as Martin suggested, for development of vaccines and also detection of the virus in individuals, and maybe later on in development of therapeutics against this virus. If you can inhibit this contact, you probably can inhibit the infection. So the spike proteins that we are expressing, we're expressing the full length S protein, and also two segments of the S protein, two fragments of it, S1 and S2 domains, we call them. And we were expressing these in mammalian cells and also in E. coli. Reason being why we use E. coli. E. coli is a common bacteria found in the environment and human guts, and a modified version of E. coli is very popular in laboratories to recombinantly express or recombinantly express or basically artificially produce large amounts of our proteins of interest. And it's relatively easy and fast and efficient. And we're also expressing the spike, full-length spike in mammalian cells that Crystal is going to comment on it later on. The other spike portion of the spike protein that we're interested in expressing is the receptor binding domain, or the portion of the spike that actually makes contact with the ACE2 receptor on our epithelial cells, lung and throat and nose epithelial cells. So in the figure, you can see that this receptor binding domain is shown in green, and the tip of it is just where basically the spike makes contact with the receptor. And so in the basically crystal structure of the receptor binding domain with the ACE2 receptor has been solved, and this is shown on the right, and you can see the point of contact between the virus and our epithelial cells. The next protein that we're interested in is the nucleocapsid of the virus. So the nucleocapsid is a protein that binds to the genetic material of the virus and wraps around it and kind of protects it. And also the other function of the nucleocapsid is that it actually forms the capsid of the virus and holds everything together, holds the spike protein and all other structural elements of the protein of the virus. This nucleocapsid holds everything together. The interest in this nucleocapsid is because a large portion of COVID-19 patients have antibodies against this protein. And early on through the infection, patients start shedding the nucleocapsid. So it's very valuable for detection of the disease. And also, it has been shown that the SARS-CoV-2 carriers that are asymptomatic, they have antibodies to the nucleocapsid and they shed this protein. So we are expressing the full-length spike nucleocapsid and also the portion of the nucleocapsid that makes contact with the RNA binding domain of the nucleocapsid. Last protein we're expressing is the main protease of the virus. So as soon as the virus enters the cell, the genetic material of the virus, which is a single-stranded RNA, starts making a large protein. It's called a polyprotein, and it's a single continuous protein. And the main protease's job is to come and chop it up and make the rest of the proteins that make up this virus. So without the main protease, there's not going to be any infection going on, and the virus is going to be non-functional. This protein is very valuable in terms of future drug development, or it can be a drug target, basically. With this, I'm going to we're going to go to Crystal, my colleague, and she's going to tell you all about her expression system and what she's doing regarding this project.
All right, my name is Dr. Crystal Richardson. I'm a postdoc at Indoor Biotechnologies, and the goal of my research has been expressing antibodies, basically the antibodies that detect allergens. So I have a background in molecular biology and protein engineering, so we're well equipped to start expressing these SARS-CoV-2 proteins. So the expression system we've been using is called XB-CHO, and that CHO actually stands for Chinese hamster cells. So we've adapted these hamster cells to actually express proteins. And we'll be expressing 4 different proteins that Saya explained: the full spike, S1, S2, and nucleocapsid. The major advantage here is that we can express high levels of these proteins, and we're talking in the order of gram amounts per month, which will be necessary to produce the testing that we need to actually help to alleviate COVID-19. So by our estimates, 1 gram can actually produce 1 to 10 million tests. So you can actually get quite a number of tests. Additionally, the advantage to using this XB-CHO system is that you can express large proteins. So the full spike protein is bigger than 100 kilodaltons. It's approximately the size of an antibody. So it's definitely an ideal system to express these proteins. And then last but not least, we're actually able to help to create these proteins for use in diagnostic testing, as well as for use in vaccine development. So that's all.
Hey, thanks, Crystal and Saya. So we're trying to do what Andrew Cuomo, in his words, says: produce these reagents at scale. And so that's what's going to happen. In our little shack behind Bodo's, we're going to be manufacturing these proteins at scale and shipping them out to labs in the US and all over the world. So that's it, guys. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Martin. Quick question. What's your timeline for getting this to scale? And, you know, is this the pace? Is this a faster pace for you guys?
I think that what we're planning to do, we're going to have some of the proteins available by the end of May. Some of the mammalian expression is probably going to leach into June a little bit. But we are hiring. We have taken on an intern who's worked with Crystal before, and he's going to work with Crystal. She's just about to graduate from the biomedical engineering at UVA. And so we have a few extra hands around, and I think we're going to be able to take this forward. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, we look forward to more questions. If you have questions as we're going along here, you can feel free to add them to the chat, and we'll make sure to call on you then. Next, we want to turn to Caretaker Medical and Jeff Pompeo, who's the president and CEO. Jeff is a serial entrepreneur. This is his 4th startup. He's been with a lot of other large companies, and including General Electric, AXA, American Management Systems. He's been in other consulting capacities and has done a lot in the med device field. And Caretaker has an innovative wireless vital signs and continuous blood pressure monitoring platform that has been seeing unprecedented growth right now. And Jeff, we're really looking forward to hearing about all that you've experienced over these past 2 months. So why don't you jump in here, and look forward to hearing from you. Hang on, we're gonna unmute. There you go. All right, Jeff.
My screen visible, Nikki?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Great. All right. So I'll be really brief in terms of what we do, but you can see our product here. We're really a wire-free patient monitoring device. We really grew up around blood pressure. The idea that spot check blood pressure is fine if you're a worried well or healthy, but the reality is your blood pressure changes constantly. In fact, it better be changing constantly, or else your arteries are made of steel and death is imminent because you've got no elasticity in your arteries. So the idea is that these spot check blood pressure readings that we all know so well leave these giant blind spots between readings. And that's what we set out to do. So as an example, it's pretty well known that 9%, for just one population as an example, 9% of anesthetized patients have a serious drop in blood pressure within the first 10 minutes after induction of anesthesia. But we don't measure that because typically you've got an upper arm cuff taking a measurement every 15 or 30 minutes. So as an example, here's a person in labor and delivery, just had her epidural. You can see her blood pressure crashed into an intervention zone where the doctor had to introduce some vasopressors to get the blood pressure back up. But if you're only taking spot check blood pressure readings like these blue dots, you don't see that happen. But if you measure your blood pressure continuously, beat by beat, you can actually see the severe drop, hypo or hypertensive event happen in real time, take interventions much earlier, which of course leads to greater outcomes. And then the holy grail, of course, is because we've got so much data, we're able to use our AI algorithms to do some predictive modeling and actually warn of an impending blood pressure drop ahead of time. So the gold standard in beat by beat blood pressure is an invasive arterial catheter. Shove a catheter in your artery, which is why it's so infrequently used. But so for caretaker, what we've done is we've got the equivalent FDA cleared blood pressure, beat by beat accuracy and waveforms, although we do it in a simple finger cuff. So from a simple finger cuff, we derive continuous beat by beat blood pressure, heart rate, respiration rate, arterial stiffness, cardiac output, and hemodynamic parameters. And then we've married in other wireless sensors to do body temperature, pulse oximetry, carbon dioxide exhale, and an ECG. So we package all this up into a completely wire-free, don't encumber the patient or tether them to poles, way to monitor all the vital signs, again, really driven by continuous beat by beat blood pressure. So prior to COVID, our value proposition had really been into critical care, ICU settings, tele-ICU settings, surgeries, labor and delivery, where you wanted a non-invasive way to measure, most importantly, beat by beat blood pressure and the other parameters. We've been doing that, and we got FDA approval in 2018, so we've been selling in the market for about 2 years after a previous 3-year R&D effort. That all changed in late February when COVID really hit in the U.S. And I think 100% of our sales since then have been COVID related, where it's all about infection control, keeping and we've defined some new marketing terms now around COVID, touchless monitoring. And we've actually had a trending hashtag called clinical distancing, meaning keep the caregiver, keep the clinician safely distanced from the patient, but still have real-time streaming vital signs data so that you make early decisions. So there's a cost win about using fewer PPE. You don't have to go into the patient's room so often anymore, maybe once or twice a day to check on something or to change batteries. But the idea is keep the clinicians outside the room, but keep the active monitoring as if you were inside the room. So our whole value proposition has shifted a little bit. And as Nikki indicated, we've had a surge in orders. In fact, we just, our largest customer is now a 10 hospital network in Australia called New South Wales that is really using caretaker for what they call hospital bed surge management. So instead of taking an early stage COVID patient and taking up an ICU bed, they'll keep them sequestered somewhere else in a lower cost setting, but still get these streaming ICU level beat by beat monitoring, streaming to our web portal or interfaced into their electronic medical records or whatever. And then we just had our second largest customer is a 7 hospital network in Wisconsin that's doing the same thing. So all of a sudden, our whole customer profile has shifted. And we've been scrambling, frankly, to keep up. The global supply chain tightening has really made it difficult on us. Fundamentally, we're an electronics company, so we manufacture circuit boards and devices. Because of the lockdown, we've had to quickly, we had just finished going to China to reduce costs for our manufacturing. We had to quickly backpedal and reverse that, come back to the US and start building here, even though the costs are a bit higher, just for expediency. But there's a shortage of every part you can possibly, I mean, even the Samsung tablets that we bundle to run our app, it's tough to get Samsung tablets in the quantities that we need. So supply chain has been our number one thing. And then number two has been remote training. You know, as we implement, we can't go on site to the hospital and teach and train across the 3 nurse shifts. You know, we're using Zoom and WebEx to do this virtual training. And there's no question that's more challenging for the trainer, more challenging for the recipient. I mean, imagine a nurse who's too busy to listen to training in a general case anyway, and now have to do that in a virtual setting. It makes it really challenging. So we're also growing. We're hiring additional training staff to do our implementation. We call them customer success technicians, and we're growing our sales force as well to see, you know, how quickly we can, you know, meet the demands, not just of COVID, but going forward. And the last thing I'll say is, you know, the great thing about, you know, our implementations are COVID is sort of the entry point. You know, there's a lot of money now that's unlocked for hospitals to do these remote monitoring. And it's all in the name of COVID and monitoring quarantine patients. But all of our customers have a plan B, you know, post-COVID, to move them and repurpose the caretakers into, you know, telemed, tele-ICU. You know, any bed is a telemetry bed now instead of a dedicated telemetry bed. And you know, the one thing I'll say about COVID, you know, telemedicine, you know, has been around for a decade, but it's always been in this state of burgeoning success. And part of that is because, you know, there's outside of rural areas, there hasn't been a big driver. And number two, there hasn't been a lot of reimbursement. You know, CMS and CPT codes haven't been very generous to spur that. COVID has changed all that. You know, there's 5 new CPT codes, everything from tele-check-in to your doctor to telepsychiatry. It's all got reimbursement codes now where Medicare and Medicare will pay and insurance companies will pay. And so I think COVID has validated that telemedicine is effective, it works, it can be profitable with the right CPT codes, and I think it's here to stay. And I think that you're going to see telemedicine, you know, really start to deliver on the promise that we've been talking about in all points of care, whether it's tele-ICU or tele-preventive health or tele-nutrition or tele-psychiatry. I think it's all going to really start to achieve the growth points that we've been talking about. So sorry, I probably went over my 5 minutes. So I'll stop there and we'll continue on.
Jeff, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of that. And it's amazing what you've been experiencing and just the transformation that's happened in such a short amount of time in this space. So we look forward to hearing more. Feel free again, bring your questions to the group chat for Jeff, and let's jump over to Joel. Jeff was talking a little bit about the training aspects, and Joel is a digital innovation leader. He spent over 15 years improving access to information and data through life sciences to healthcare industries, and is the co-founder and CEO and president of Archimedics, and they apply behavioral science to transform learning and behaviors to generate actionable insights. He's been doing a lot of work in the clinical research space, and we'd love to hear updates from that side, but also how his platform is being transformed to support training for the frontline workers. So Joel, love to hear from you.
Sure. Thank you, Nikki. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you. I'm glad we're able to connect virtually. Hopefully we'll do it again in person in the near future. As Nikki shared, our focus at Archimedics is really predicated on applying behavioral science to change the way that we learn and how we can analyze and assess that behavior to improve operations. And we do that for tens of thousands of healthcare professionals on the front line, for healthcare organizations like the University of Virginia Health System, nearly every major pharmaceutical firm, biotech, and global leading clinical research organizations. The platform's used in a variety of different ways, but more specifically in terms of COVID and our response to the pandemic, I wanted to take you through a couple of specific examples of how our team has really focused on working overtime to provide not just the solutions and a new set of tools to equip our healthcare and life science partners, but really stepped up to develop some innovative activities around essential documents that are critical to our understanding as a community, as public health leaders, as clinical research professionals, about how we really should be conducting clinical trials today and the need for contact tracing and more widespread testing across the nation to safely reopen. So with that, I thought I wouldn't share any slides today, and instead I'll take you on a brief visual tour, and then we can open up for questions as folks see fit. So let me know when everyone can see my screen.
Looks good.
Okay. All right. So let's start with a blog post that I technically published last night, even though it says it went live today. What I wanted to do was to explain to all of our partners and colleagues across the world how we as a team are really trying to take collective action and improve society's ability to battle COVID-19, and to do it in a way that leverages our expertise, our resources, and the means and will that we have to make a positive impact. And so when we look across, our collective ability, what we always do is go back to our strengths, and our strengths are improving knowledge and competence and confidence for frontline healthcare workers, for clinical researchers, and now for public health professionals. And two activities that we've just rolled out and launched in the last number of days focus specifically on that. The first is helping to ensure that clinical researchers understand how to conduct a trial today. And there are over 650 active clinical trials advancing approaches around new medicines and new vaccines to treat COVID. And those are vaccines, those are antivirals. With all of those studies, it's really difficult to get patients into a clinic when the clinic's shut down or when that patient can't travel. And it's even more difficult to monitor the success of that trial and its adherence to a protocol if your clinical research associates can't travel or visit that site. So how do you conduct a clinical study today globally in the midst of a pandemic? Well, the FDA has taken a lot of that into account and issued guidance back in March on how to conduct a clinical trial during the midst of a pandemic. They later came back and updated that guidance on April 2nd with an extensive Q&A from industry practitioners. It's a lot of information to digest, especially as we're all running fast, we're distracted. I don't know if you heard my kids earlier. It's hard to stay focused in this time and to deliver the value that we need as society. So if we can increase the understanding of the clinical research workforce about what the FDA is recommending and what those practical steps really are for you to take in the conduct of your study, then we can help to advance clinical research. And I'll actually take you through an example of what that activity looks like. The second area that we most recently focused on is around contact tracing. This has made its way through the news over the last 2 weeks. Former Commissioner Scott Gottlieb came out yesterday and said we as a nation need another $46 billion to invest immediately in contact tracing. Johns Hopkins University unveiled a plan 2 weeks ago that called for at least 100,000 contact tracers to be hired across state and local public health departments. Well, what does contact tracing really mean to us? How do we implement it? How do we ensure that we can test, trace, and isolate so that we can safely let our children go back to school and we can return to the workplace and we can get back to the business of being Americans day in and day out? We can't do that without effective tracing and without effective testing. But most Americans don't understand what that really means and what it's going to take to equip and train and support a new global workforce across the world, not just here in the US. Well, Johns Hopkins brought leaders together to think this through, to put a plan in place with actionable steps that references what other nations have gone through. New Zealand, Iceland, South Korea, Singapore, they've all moved forward with contact tracing over the last 2 months. They've deployed apps. There's lessons learned. New Zealand rolled out an audit report of what they thought was working and realized that they were struggling at scale. All of those lessons learned, we should be considering and applying in our own work here in the Commonwealth and across the nation. So that's an activity that we just built and launched to equip not just public health professionals, but all of us to understand what it takes to move forward with contact tracing. Those two programs are launched after we put together our first educational initiative back in March. Really at the start of the lockdown, we partnered with UKB Med, Free CME, and Johns Hopkins University with Dr. Allwater, their lead infectious disease professional, to put together an activity for frontline healthcare workers to help them understand at the time how to more effectively diagnose, treat, and protect themselves when confronting patients that are fighting COVID. That activity has been live for the last, I think, 6 weeks. In the last week, we just launched not only 2 new activities, but an entirely new solution that the Archimedix team has spent the last months working on, and we accelerated development and launched the beta before we really thought we were ready, because we felt we had to get this information out into the public and enable and equip clinical research professionals and public health organizations with the information they need. So I thought I would take folks on a quick tour of these 2 activities. The first one here is, this is the Johns Hopkins plan. This is their PDF that they published. And if we did a quick show of hands, how many of us are familiar with the Johns Hopkins plan? Anyone seen it before? This plan lays out why contact tracing is so critical and how we as a nation and state and local regions should move forward. It's a lot to digest. So the Archimedix platform enables you to connect key information to key resources, to dive deeper into tools and other multimedia assets that you can make available to equip your workforce to make those decisions to move forward, to learn lessons from how South Korea first dealt with the epidemic. They learned from their experience with MERS. Those lessons they've applied, and it's why South Korea has such significantly lower infection and death rates than we do here in the US. They moved quickly. They learned their lessons from their past epidemic. There's been a lot of talk around contact tracing in apps that are necessary for us to be able to track information, do it digitally, and do it in a private and secure way. Well, what we learned in putting this activity together is that MIT, not just Google and Apple, have been working on a solution, and MIT has a model that can securely encrypt data between Bluetooth devices and ensure that your privacy is actually protected, while still providing you an alert, letting you know whether or not someone that you've been in close contact with has tested positive for the virus. It will then send you an alert, it will notify public health, and will protect everyone else's private information. Those are the types of solutions that the country needs to be made aware of. This plan by itself has lots of great references all the way at the end of it. Scroll all the way down. It's a lot of references to get through. These references were put together by Johns Hopkins back in March. Many of them are still relevant, but the world is moving so quickly today. How do you keep folks up to date on the latest information? So for example, New Zealand's audit report, that came out after this plan was published. Commissioner Gottlieb's request for $46 billion, that just happened 2 days ago. That information needs to get layered into a document that can be a living, breathing, essential piece of information. That's what Archimedix is trying to do. And we've built this activity around contact tracing and a similar activity around the FDA's guideline to equip those professionals with up-to-date information that they can access free of charge. All you have to do is go to our solutions page or to my blog post, and I'll share a link. And anyone can access these activities. You can share them with your friends and colleagues. We can help to make all of us better informed around what it's really going to take to beat COVID. And if you have any ideas or suggestions on other essential documents that you think are critical for the wider audience to understand, please let us know and potentially collaborate with us to develop those activities and make them available free of charge. And with that, I'll stop and answer any questions that you might have.
Joel, this is awesome, and you guys have definitely been moving quickly, so thank you so much for all you're doing. We'll absolutely be sure to share this. Something we're hearing, and we talked a little bit about this in our last meeting, was activities for how to re-emerge into the new normal. So a lot of people are looking for best practices and case studies for how we might do that. I don't know if that's something that's relevant here, but thinking of other documents that would be useful. Everybody's kind of saying what are the best practices as we get back to work. We can chat about that a little bit later. Last, I'd love to present and introduce you all to Kirby Farrell, who's the CEO of Locus Health. He is an entrepreneur with a telecommunications background. He's been with many various companies, but he co-founded Locus Health back in 2012. And his vision then was to create a clinically driven technology to enable remote patient care. And never before has that been so important as it is today. So Kirby, we'd love to hear more about your journey and recent activities happening with your technology.
Great, thank you. I was really hoping Joel wasn't going to use a presentation, so I wasn't going to have to feel bad, but I guess I'm just going to have to feel bad now. But so by the way, my last company, we provided secure remote satellite comms. It was initially started as a provide ISP service in third world countries, which was a great humanitarian thing, but not a very good business plan. But it turned out our satellite infrastructure had great coverage of Iraq and Afghanistan. And we ended up being a major supplier to the US military for wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, when a war starts and you're selling to the military and you have something they want, things change dramatically. And I used to think there was some kind of analogy to healthcare when I started Locus, thinking that with Obamacare and the like, that there was going to be a transformation of healthcare. Well, there really hasn't been a transformation of healthcare, except now there literally is a war, a global war. And it's pretty amazing the close analogies between the two. So what we do is we enable, if you think of us as a nurse in the home, we enable care at home. And if the nurse came by to see you once a day, twice a day, 4 times a day, they're going to want to know not only just, your basic body, what's going on with you, what your heart rate is, what your blood pressure is, how much you weigh, what your blood sugar level is. They're going to have a bunch of questions for you. They're going to want to know, how are you doing? What's your cough like? What's your sleeping like? What's your pain level? How much have you eaten today? Have you taken your meds today? Well, what Locus does is enable that kind of visit to happen and then gather and display that information to the clinician in a very easy, quick way. Because it was mentioned earlier, you're talking about people that are working in chaos. So what we enable is for a clinical team to manage patient populations at home. It's a cloud-based platform, so it's secure, hosted at AWS. And then we've built an iOS app today. That's going to move to any smartphone device soon. And that app runs on iPads today. So the patient goes home with an iPad. Locus manages that whole infrastructure. So we provide mobile device management to the patients for the health system. And that iPad has not only the Locus app on it, but we can load any other app on that iPad that the health system wants. So it's all locked down, and then it's connected to our platform. And then our platform is either provides secure access directly from a workstation, or it can be integrated with the EMR. So at UVA, it's Epic Shop. They've fully integrated it with Epic. So you can actually order the service. You can order and deploy the Locus platform right in Epic. The reason that's important is the platform can then be configured for virtually any patient population. And when COVID hit here in Charlottesville, UVA set up 3 remote clinics, and in 5 days, we configured our solution to support an entire COVID population. So that not only configured the patient side, but we configured the whole dashboard for the clinicians that was then provided to more than 50 clinicians within UVA. We did the same thing at Inova. So Inova Health System was already a customer of ours. When this hit, the Inova Shar Cancer Center came to us and said they were very concerned about, you know, the most high-risk population being a oncology population. So in 7 days at Inova, we configured a COVID solution specifically for oncology population, and they rolled out service to 300 patients in about the first week. In fact, I think at Inova, NPR in Washington is doing a segment on them tomorrow. We've got a great relationship with Apple. So Apple has set up a meeting between myself and Dr. Tracy Hoke at UVA, who is our, really who I work with there. And we're having a meeting with a CNET reporter on Friday. Apple has identified Locus as their care at home solution. So if you have an Apple team coming into a health system, talking about, they're really evangelizing about Apple. They have 3 pillars: Apple in the hospital, Apple research, and Apple care at home. The care at home, they really talk about Locus. We're in 25 different health systems around the country right now, primarily children's hospitals, because children's hospitals is where there's been the strongest economic incentive. So we enable hospitals to safely discharge babies out of the NICU 2 weeks earlier than they normally would. The babies do much better at home with mom, and the hospitals are able to free up those precious NICU beds, which is the primary moneymaker for children's hospitals. For us, as was mentioned, I think COVID changes everything. It makes it high priority. We've built an enterprise platform. COVID is a perfect application of our platform. It can be configured to a wide variety of populations. It's designed for the clinicians, integrated with Epic and Cerner, demonstrated outcomes. So for us, we had been really up and down because of the lack of economic incentive for healthcare systems to provide care at home. Well, now there's not only economic incentive, but there is keep the doctor safe, keep the patient safe. So again, in UVA's case and Innova's and places around the country, they're not just using it to care for COVID patients, but they're using it to keep other patients out of the hospital, high-risk patients that they would otherwise have brought in. And this way, they want the patient out to keep the patient safe, and they want the patient out to keep the doctor safe. Yeah, it's changed our world, and exciting to be with you guys. That's our story. Did we lose Nikki?
Sorry there, Kirby. I was talking on mute. I was mentioning what comes to my mind in hearing you speak is the opportunities in the assisted living facilities where COVID has spread quite rapidly. Is that something you're thinking about or working on?
Yeah, for us, retirement communities, yes. Actual assisted living communities, nursing homes. The issue there is that they're highly regulated, and so they're in the nursing home to be cared for by the nursing home. Mm-hmm. So it gets pretty complicated to bring in another platform and say that, for instance, UVA is caring for a patient in the XYZ nursing home, which is supposed to have its own clinical staff. But for retirement communities, outside of the actual nursing community, absolutely. This is a great application. And I think that, and by the way, in June, when we bring the app out to be on any phone, I think you'll find a lot more use. You know, at UVA now, between our platforms, we support almost 10,000 patients and employees a year, and that will grow. I mean, UVA's been a great mothership for us. And a tough day at UVA today, by the way. So they're
Certainly.
announcing furloughs, I believe.
Mm. Well, thank you, Kirby. I want to turn to a few questions that have come in on the group chat from John Smedgy. This is a question for Martin. Martin, is there a practical way of using your knowledge of the proteins for diagnostic testing? RNA is tough to measure, and is it possible to test for these proteins? Let's see. Hey, Martin, can you unmute?
Yeah, sorry, I've unmuted.
No problem.
Yeah, so it is possible. We develop tests all the time to measure allergen proteins, and you can certainly do that for the coronavirus. The real issue is how can you get those tests done very quickly using nasal swabs and so on, which is why people use the RT-PCR, because it's a quicker test. Now, you can do that coronavirus testing using rapid tests, or you could potentially, but it's just going to take a while to get that done. And then there are issues about whether that testing would be, what sample you would use, whether it would be sufficiently sensitive, those kinds of things. But theoretically, yeah, it's all possible. While I have the mic, I just had a couple of questions, actually, one for Jeff and one for Joel. And that is, there's been a lot of talk about using pulse oximetry for people who have this, to monitor their oxygen levels in case they have this silent pneumonia, Jeff. So is it possible to get your device to be something to do pulse oximetry that somebody could get, like a Fitbit, that type of thing? And then the question for Joel was, in terms of contact tracing, the real question there is infrastructure, and is it possible, for example, to have an infrastructure which might be people in AmeriCorps or the Peace Corps, where they already have a structure set up that you could actually engage those people and get an army of students, if you like, involved in doing the contact tracing?
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. Thank you, Martin. Yeah, so with the caretaker kit, we do pulse oximetry as part of the things that we measure today. So we're capturing that already. With regard to there's something called the Roth index that is really becoming topical about that silent pneumonia. It's a little bit more than just pulse oximetry degradation over time. It's a combination of that and end-tidal CO2. You know, are you dispelling the carbon dioxide quickly enough to do the counterbalance? So, and we do that as well. So I think what we're going to find, you know, once all the smoke kind of clears, pulse oximetry is a good, cheap, easy to use at home kind of general assessment. But when you get into reality, you're going to need more than just the pulse oximetry to pick up the other parameters, including probably cardiac output, although the jury's still out on that a little bit. So like everything involved with COVID, don't blink. Tomorrow there'll be new data that sends us down a slightly different path, I think.
Thanks, Jeff. How about Joel?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So it's a very timely question, Martin. If you can see my screen, Johns Hopkins actually calls that out in terms of different ways to build the infrastructure and get to 100,000 plus contact tracers. And in our research and building this activity, we actually found an article calling for the suspension of medical school and a nationalization of all first-year medical students so that they can provide support in a public medical corps to do just this and have that count towards their education, figure out a way to reimburse them. But yes, there's been similar calls to pull back folks from the Peace Corps. that have now been returned to the US. I believe there was roughly 6,000 Peace Corps members that are available. New York just hired 1,000, Massachusetts has hired 1,000, San Francisco's moved forward. Michigan not only has a plan in place, they've put up a website with a call for volunteers. So at a state level, we're seeing local teams move forward and push forward initiatives. North Carolina just rolled out a collaborative initiative today. We haven't yet seen the same effort in the Commonwealth specific to contact tracing. At least I haven't seen that yet. It would be great if we had a national unifying ability to pull all of these resources together. That's what Johns Hopkins and others is calling for, but we have yet to see that leadership emerge.
Thank you, Joel. One more question from Jeff, from John Newby. This question is for Jeff. There's a big discussion about onshoring the manufacturing of elements needed for medical technology, APIs, et cetera. How realistic do you feel this goal is for the med device space, and what timeline is realistic for making that happen?
Yeah, great question, John. I think it is, in my limited view of the world, I think it already is happening. I mean, I think it started with the tariffs, kind of pre-COVID. People were reassessing, coming back onshore. And then when basically the border shut with COVID, and even today, you just can't rely on delivery. DHL, they won't commit. They promise best effort, and things ebb and flow by 10 days. We're finding. I think all those things are bringing the reality in it that although you can save a couple of dollars on COGS maybe or on unit costs, there's a strategic value of at least keeping some of your intellectual property that's being converted to manufacturing, whether it's software or hardware, keeping that onshore where you can wrap your arms around it and have more control.
Thanks, Jeff. We also want to acknowledge another company we have online today with DJ Crotto from MicroAir. I want to mention that they've been manufacturing tens of thousands of face shields for frontline workers, and they're doing a lot in this effort. DJ, do you just want to give us your short pitch on what you've been working on and how that's gone for you guys? Is he still on the line?
Sorry, like everyone else, I was trying to unmute.
There we go.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, compared to the incredible work that these other people are doing, we're just doing a very humble and small thing. MicroAir manufactures powered surgical instruments here in Charlottesville, and we've seen a real reduction, of course, in our business from that. But we were contacted by a couple of different healthcare facilities, and seemed like it wasn't too big of a jump to repurpose our manufacturing to come up with a production line for these face shields. So it was really kind of a nice community effort because we were able to get raw materials from a couple of companies that I wouldn't have expected. Danny's Upholstery here in Charlottesville, and also a company called CvilleMaterials. They had laser cut polyester film and adhesive backed foam strips. So we just put about 6 people on the line in one of the shifts and a few more in another shift, and bought enough materials to make 50,000 masks, shields rather, which they're already going really quickly. So we'll probably have to order another batch of raw materials. But really, I am just blown away by the incredible work that the other folks on this call are doing, and thank you for letting me participate.
Well, DJ, it's everybody's participating at all these different levels, and so thank you to MicroAir and for all the work you're doing as well. Feel free to, again, add any questions you might have on the Zoom chat, and in the meantime, wanted to also hear from Stephen Tavares from Novo Vista. They have a platform for supporting mental health concerns. And so, Stephen, tell us just a little bit about the diagnostics and interventions that you have to track employee mental health.
Sure. So we're looking at burnout right before this hit and are piecing together a few different technologies more that would assess the state of your mental health and your psychological state, from basically email traffic, how your meetings, things like that. And we realized that as this came forward, the problem was probably going to be more severe. So we wanted to, what we were hoping to do is leverage some of this technology so to give folks kind of an early indication of when, their staff might be hitting, really high stress levels, to get in front of it. I think we saw in the news yesterday when it happens when you don't, it just kind of hits you on the side and you lose some people, which in the current state we can't afford to lose on the front line. So the platform that we're testing looks at that, and we're hoping to do, we're still in the very early stages, is kind of comb through the appropriate interventions for addressing some of those states. So we're kind of in more of an experimental phase at this point, looking to grow, and just saw this as an opportunity to maybe try something that might be a little bit out of the box, but effective in terms of getting in front of this issue, which is evergreen, but just has become even more in everybody's in front of everybody's eyes, given the current situation.
And the platform is based on years of research that has been done by James Pennebaker at the University of Texas. He developed a lexicon, and when these words in the lexicon show up, basically you can infer from that certain psychological states. And it's been tested widely, and he's been using it for many, many years, as have been his graduate students. So there's a pretty strong foundation of research to base those on.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think we're about out of time, but hopefully everybody got a really great view of all the things happening in the BioHub here, from indoor to and their diagnostic tools that they're developing, to the remote telehealth solutions, and all the things happening. Thank you everyone for all your effort and what you're doing. We've been saying together we are all stronger. CvilleBioHub is here with you to support all of you. And if there are things that we can be doing, please reach out anytime. I was hearing companies are hiring. I just want to mention really quickly that we do have we're launching a new website, and it will include places for companies to post job posts. So please keep that in mind and look for that. We are matching interns to companies that are looking for support right now. So definitely, reach out to us. You can reach out to Steph at CvilleBioHub.org. That's STEPH, and we'll get you connected for some intern resources if needed. And we are also co-leading a local economic development recovery plan effort called Project Rebound, looking for anybody can participate. I'm co-leading a session and committee with the biotech industry, manufacturing, and food and beverage, and in partnership with Hunter Smith from Champion Brewery, and we're working together with Chris Engel from the city of Charlottesville to put together a plan that's a broader community initiative. If you're interested, please send a note, Nikki at CvilleBioHub.org, if you're interested in participating in that. Thanks to a few other biotech leaders. Joel, I know, has signed up for that, so thanks so much. Our next event will have another virtual forum. Details are to be determined May 12th from 12 to 1, again, this lunchtime hour. So put that on your calendar and look for the invite for RSVPing. And we'll be talking more about the future of digital health. We got a little bit of insight towards the telehealth activities happening right now, but we're going to be highlighting even more of the Charlottesville area companies that are working in this field, and what they may have been experiencing, and new opportunities as a result of the COVID responsiveness. So that's on May 26th, also 12 to 1. So thanks so much. And you know, we look forward to hearing from you all, and hope you all stay well. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.